Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode. We have our world famous speaker, Professor David Smith, Mr. Tom Rose, Professor Rob, and Mr. Marshall. We will discuss about AI, and I'm really happy we are getting many invitations from different country, especially for arranging conference and academy. Uh, Even from Malaysia, Sabah, Sarawak is the two different states. We are getting invitations as well as from India, from Bangladesh, from Indonesia, from Vietnam. I'm just waiting when this pandemic gone over. Maybe all of our speaker can come to Malaysia or Singapore. Even Singapore will be better for them, and we can arrange our offline conference because we are getting huge invitations. They really want you in the land. They want to meet our speakers. Hopefully it will be very interesting, but today we're going to discuss about AI at the edge. AI is very important. Last week we discussed about artificial intelligence. Even now, many corporations and organizations they're facing a lot of challenges in this COVID-19 situation, especially lack of employee. They are another challenges. So maybe artificial intelligence can be helpful for them. We have our expert panelists, and expert panelists gonna give guideline and strategy for the corporation. And request all of our corporation, you can share your case, share your problem. I'm sure our speaker gonna help us. Professor David Smith, how you want to analyze to this topic?
Oh, Sharif, thank you so much. AI at the edge is the natural evolution of the movement towards edge computing, where you begin to push computing out on the edge of the cloud, where it's close to the sources that are doing it, particularly as we see the growth of Internet of Things, as we see the needs for low latency in the network, and as we see the movement towards near real time computing to real-time computing. So that's the emphasis for edge computing. And AI at the edge is the other side of it. What AI at the edge means that the AI algorithms are processed locally on the hardware device that is at the edge of the network. Uh, these algorithms are using data, it could be sensor data, signals, and things that are created on the device, the edge computer, or it can be tightly connected to near devices like Internet of Things and others. Uh, a device using edge computing does not need to be connected in order to work properly. It can process data and make decisions independently without a connection. And what does that mean? It means I don't have to always go back to the central processing uh, to go with it. So it's putting decision making and AI processing out at the edge. And in many instances, in most instances, it can run standalone. Where in the past you would take signals from that, receive them, and move them back more to the center of the cloud or a distributed center of the cloud. Uh, AI at the edge is taking it the other way. You know, a you can begin to look at an AI application running on a microprocessor in a power tool that's being used. And that power tool is a great representation of what AI at the edge is, because it has to respond to the needs you're making at that time and to the torque it's receiving, the other elements like that, any automation you have set in it for depth and other things, it responds locally at the edge without going back to the core. Why is AI at the edge important? It allows real time operations, including data creation, data decision, and action where not minutes, not seconds, but where milliseconds matter. You know, real-time operations is very important for self-driving cars, for robots, for things like the manufacturing in real time, the building in real time. Uh, so it has a lot of applications. I would hate to see uh, autonomous cars and robots without AI at the edge. And AI at the edge will reduce power consumption, therefore, it's going to improve battery life, and it will reduce costs for data communications because less data is going to be transmitted. And and by processing data locally at the edge and doing the AI at the edge, you can avoid the problem of streaming and storing a lot of data to the cloud, which really helps improve the security, helps improve the privacy of what you're doing. And like I said, it helps improve the reactions. And a lot of the very advanced technologies we're looking at like the autonomous driving, uh, and like robots and like real-time reactions to things would not be possible if we didn't push the edge computing environment and the edge and artificial intelligence at the edge. So Sharif, I hope that's, oh, one other thing before I leave that one. The market size for this is at this point still pretty small. In 2020, it was only about $9 billion, and by 2030, it is predicted to reach around $60 billion. So it is one that is in its early stages, which means there's a lot of opportunity for people to begin to work and use it. And it's really the future of the type of devices where real time is important. I would hate to have something sitting here monitoring my health and needs to take an immediate action on me, where it has to go back over the network, through the cloud, through the congestion on the internet to tell it what to do. So it's important in many places, and it can make the difference between life and death. So Sharif, thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor. Mr. Tom Rose, you are a creative man as well as you are expert in AI. And like World Talent Economy Forum, School of Talent Economy, we have many creative projects. I told you before, like previously, that king from this palace. I'm just sharing this palace. Uh, it's in India, the king from Jhargram. He actually invite us, everyone, all of our speakers. Uh, we want to do some creative projects, and we want to develop a sustainable ecosystem for this area. This is King's Palace. The king actually working with World Talent Economy Forum. Yeah, everybody actually the partners. My questions to you that maybe this is 100 years, more than 100 years before this King's Palace is developed. Very beautiful palace. All of the creative work and activities happening this King's Palace. So, so my question is that like in future, artificial intelligence, they can be creative like human. They can develop this kind of projects. They can help how they can collaborate this kind of creative and innovative project.
Well, I think first would be to define what creativity is. Hear me okay? And and really creativity. It's hard to imagine anything being original anymore, original ideas, because we kind of seem to be in this fractal pattern that keeps repeating. And so, um, a creativity is really just a synthesis of two ideas, usually, in this dualistic perspective. And so, yes, AI can certainly be absolutely creative. And with that definition, it synthesizes many things, and it can find the things that have not yet been put together, to create a new kind of genre or something, for instance. But yeah, going back to what David was saying about how AI at the edge, I think that's a great segue into the topic of sentient rights or AI rights, because that would bring up the case if you could identify an AI at the edge robot, for instance, who is not connected to some cloud or is falls under the definition of personhood, whatever that we decide that definition is. And so I think it was great to know about this concept of AI at the edge, because that's how, just like in blockchain, we can have anonymous, individualized points of awareness, or consciousness, or robots that could be considered persons. Because there are many human beings that when I'm not sure that are not automatons, or just reacting as biochemical algorithms. But anyway, yeah, I think AI can certainly be creative, and we're seeing that already. It's writing stories and paintings and putting things together. The question is when it has all the qualia that we have and then some. Um, what can it source original ideas? I think that might be the key to discerning whether something has intention and has motive of its own. If it can create or come up with an original idea that doesn't require the synthesizing of two other ideas. So that's the kind of day I'm having.
Yeah, definitely. We want to develop some creative project, especially with your US6, because in Asia Pacific, it has a huge demand. This kind of creativity, innovations, especially different organizations, even the kings, they like some creative projects. So definitely, your project is highly applicable for these countries.
Yeah.
Professor Rob, you are from industry. You have excellent knowledge about different largest corporations. So we want some real world applications of AI. AI? Can you give some example? Yes, repeatedly you give lot of example, but our audience can learn more from your experience.
Well, the most advanced, at least at the moment, use of AI tends to fall into two distinct areas. One, conversational computers, and the other is robots and autonomous cars. Autonomous cars really came out in kind of the lead 2 decades ago, where much of the heavy development was going in to create this concept of a vehicle that could drive itself, and the number of sensors required to make it happen typically is in the 20s to 30s in terms of sensors, and that amount of sensory information then funnels into the in vehicle AI, and then the vehicle AI typically can communicate with other vehicles, vehicle to vehicle, and then can communicate to a host service of some kind for updates, traffic alerts, environmental conditions, and the rest of it. But to a large extent, in that implementation, the AI is functionally remote. The automobile, if it loses cell connectivity, has to be able to continue to function, and so the predominant load on the machine is in the machine. Then, with regard to conversational computers, these are computers that are predominantly used for telesales at the moment. Some are used for information sites, but for the most part, information sites use older technology. The large scale trials and implementations have been good enough to convince the people at the other end of the call that the computer is a person. And there were several instances of people trying to actually ask out the computer, since they use a female voice and men being men. So there've been a lot of advancements there. The industry has showcased unique art in terms of computers being able to write books and create music, though it tends to be derivative. The AI learns is fed a bunch of literature or fed a bunch of music, so it can determine what is good and what is bad, what's popular and what isn't, and then it creates a derivative work based on what it has learned. Now, I'm not convinced that people are a lot different in terms of that process. It just occurs over a long period of time. But an awful lot of music, for instance, that are created by human artists does show up as derivative work, as work. In fact, it has had copyright infringement charges because it's so clearly derivative in some points that it appears to violate other artists' intellectual property. The interesting thing about AI is it spreads that derivative work so broadly that it's much harder to connect their work back to the work that created it. But that depends on the size of the data set that's used. So if it's a small data set, then the work's going to clearly sound derivative. If it's a large data set, then it might take an expert to determine what the derivative nature would be, and even they may not be able to tell because it's so blended from so many artists that you can't make that distinction. And it sounds like anybody else's original work. So it's those are the areas being used. The other areas that they're getting some focus. I mentioned robotics. The manufacturing automation is having a huge influx of AI. AI is being used as a defense against malware. reasonably successfully. The two firms that tend to lead with that are BlackBerry, and then there's another firm out of Israel. The name escapes me at the moment. May come to me as I wake up. That also does Deep Instinct. That also does heavy deep learning AI antivirus stuff. And the neat thing about those implementations is you don't need to update the antivirus software as often. Typically, you only have to update it a couple times a year, if that. And it's very successful at identifying day one viruses, 0-day viruses. And the reason is because the software is looking for anything that's behaving unusually. It captures all the usual behavior of other applications and employees. And when any of those elements start to do something unusual, say an employee that has never looked at customer records suddenly starts looking at lots of customer records, it flags and blocks. And then somebody comes in and makes a determination whether that's somebody doing what they're supposed to be doing, or it's a system acting illegally, or an employee that's acting out, which also can be a cause of a breach. We certainly saw that over the years for employees going and using their credentials to do things that are inappropriate also need to be stopped and the exposure corrected. So AI right now is in limited use. We are still at narrow AI for the most part. Still probably 15 years out from general AI. And with the topic on topic with regard to AI at the edge, that is predominantly used to reduce traffic across the network and reduce the loading on the central processing site, which can be problematic, especially if you're capturing video, which is another area where AI at the edge is coming to the fore, predominantly to lower the amount of video data being sent, especially with some of these 4K cameras. Video data being transmitted to a central processing site, so it lowers the network load and it lowers the loading on that central processing unit. It can introduce bias, though. The big issue with distributed AI or AI at the edge is its ability to put bias into the system. Give you, for instance, say if you had security cameras that were supposed to record break-ins or people that were in a location that weren't supposed to be in, if that individual wore a mask that made them look like an animal and this AI and the cameras were not set to record animals, there's a chance that the individual with the mask could bypass that security, therefore generating a biased result and a false negative with regard to a breach. So you do have to watch pretty closely when you're doing AI at the edge that it's not compromising the data stream and not providing the information needed to make a timely decision. The biggest example of that I've run into was at Amazon when a forensic team came in and discovered that a regional distribution site was sending stuff to end customers and causing huge delays that weren't being picked up by the system because the captured methodology did not track deliveries from central sites since they weren't supposed to be doing that. They since have mitigated that, and now if a central site does start delivering directly, that'll be caught and flagged, and so that same kind of biased result won't recur. So you spend an awful lot of time trying to determine what's not being sent and whether that's creating false negatives or false positives at the central control site, and thus corrupting the result.
Thank you, Professor Rob. Mr. Marshall, you are solving problem for climate change, as well as how your organization actually utilizing artificial intelligence for solving this climate change related problem.
Well, that's a great question, Sharif. I think as both David and Tom have pointed out, and just now, the conversation going back with Rob about the use of AI at the edge, we should be exploring this opportunity. But a little history on AI from my perspective, which is informing how we're looking at it, is that AI was founded in 1956. It goes that far back. A lot of people are not aware of it. Today, I think Rob mentioned several uses of AI, such as the self-driving car. but also there's AI applications include advanced search engines. Google uses recommended systems such as YouTube, Amazon, Netflix. They all use some form of AI. And also understanding human speech is a critical component of AI. And so we have Siri and Alexa, right? So those I think Rob was talking about the female voice. So those are elements that are all part of AI. But there's been, since 1956, there's been several iterations. As you well know, Sharif, part of my background is adoption of innovation, bringing innovations into the marketplace. And I think what David Smith brought to the table, which is the volume of potential opportunity from a revenue point of view, it started out small. It still is relatively small compared to other types of technologies. And I think part of the reason is because the adoption curve has been stilted. We have what is called a kind of an AI winter, meaning that we've gone through several iterations where people try to bring things to the table and it didn't quite adopt. And so the question is, will it adopt now? And I think both Tom and Rob have kind of addressed those issues in the fact that we're now getting that when they are integrated, become part of the AI at the edge, as David calls it. And that would be like the concept of blockchain technology. And then the question becomes more of a question of the subfields of AI research, which are centered around certain goals and the use of these tools. In our regard, for sustainable development technology, AI can be very helpful if we can get it to the point where, like a self-driven car, a system could operate pretty independently of being able to take waste in large quantities and convert it into various outputs. But by the same token, I think it's important to understand that there's always going to be some human interaction with it.
Hello, Mr. Marshall. Yes, I'm sorry. I think he has internet. Yes,
Yeah.
Mr. Marshall.
Did you lose me?
Yes.
Are you there? Yeah,
Now
I
okay.
saw it went out and back in again. So basically, I think I think the artificial intelligence component at the edge is coming. I do think it will create some adoption, but I think it's got a ways to go. And I also believe that part of the reticence or the adoption winter that has occurred with AI has to do with humans, not so much about the technology. I think that I think that what's happening here is that humans are very reticent, and I think there's fear based on the adoption of artificial intelligence, because what it means psychologically, it means that people are going to have to be part of accepting artificial intelligence decisions that are not made by humans. And I think that psychologically is a hurdle that has to be overcome. So will it be used in our industry? I do believe it will be. I think parts of it are already being integrated. We're integrating, as Tom pointed out, blockchain technology to manage what the inputs are so we can measure that, and what the outputs are so we can measure that, and make sure that there's no pilferage or there's no dissipation based upon some anomaly in the environment. So we need to address those issues. But I think we're in early days, in my opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. Professor Paul, you are also a climate change activist. Climate change is definitely a big problem, even for Asia Pacific. For many countries, like I'm from Bangladesh, Maldives, Indonesia, India, they have challenges. So, how AI can be helpful for these climate change problems, and what type of solutions you have in mind?
Well, clearly, with any new technology, it can be applied in ways which help people, but it can also be used and kind of divide society and cause larger wealth gaps. For example, if there's an AI technology which becomes sort of ubiquitous and it's produced by one corporation, which is collecting all of the profits from whatever it is doing, that AI is doing, then the CEOs and directors of that corporation become filthy rich, essentially, and the inequality in society in terms of income distribution, etc., is even more exacerbated. I mean, we've seen this clearly with the in the last 2 years with COVID, right? Because the world's 10 wealthiest people kind of doubled their net worth in a matter of year or two, because it was the CEOs of companies which had products or applications that were vital became used in great demand as people were working from home, etc. I mean, in terms of the autonomous vehicles, it's they have the although accidents will be greatly reduced and there'll be there's lots of positive benefits from them. It will drive literally thousands to millions of drivers. The Uber drivers, Uber Eats drivers, the truck drivers, the cab drivers, they'll all be without jobs, right? So if it comes in too quickly and displaces huge numbers of people, there's going to be tremendous social unrest. I'm just thinking, I mean, a perfect example of that is you're probably, I don't know if everybody here is aware of what is happening right now in Ottawa, where I live. This is day 6 of the downtown part of Ottawa, and actually much of Ottawa being totally paralyzed by thousands of trucks in this, trucker convoy, which came into the city on Friday and hasn't left. I mean, some people have, but the city is essentially, paralyzed at the moment. And the police are not issuing any parking tickets and noise infractions. They're doing nothing. Not a single trucker has been arrested. And this is in the downtown core. Meanwhile, so the people of Ottawa just living here are very, very disrupted by this. And this is over the mandate of a vaccine, right? So now imagine that the trucking industry, has mass job layoffs from AI, right? Then you can imagine that transportation systems and delivery systems and our shelves will be bare, etc. If this group of people decides to protest and loss of jobs from self-driving trucks and things, it's just going to paralyze economies and countries, and people will eventually just say that they've had enough and just shut everything down. And this is not just a thing unique to Canada. This could happen in any country because we have such a reliance on this industry. So they've essentially been given a complete pass in terms of the lawlessness of this protest, and they've broken every bylaw in the city. Yet the bylaw officers, if you just go south of where the protests are, if you park illegally, you're going to get a ticket. If you exceed a 2-hour time limit, you're going to get a ticket. Whereas, people in Ottawa are just completely fed up, and they're saying, well, hey, let me just put a big Canada flag on my car and park illegally south of downtown because I shouldn't be getting a ticket. Like it's really, so now the general public in the city is starting to get extremely upset with the police in the city, with the bylaw officers, with the mayor of Ottawa, with the provincial government, with the federal government, right? Those people, those governments, they just literally they don't know what to do. They fear that if they crack down on the truckers, that it will incite many other truckers across the country. There's already a second incident in southern Alberta where 100 trucks are blocking the border from Canada to the U.S. And the police decided, the RCMP said, okay, we're going to start removing them. We'll start towing them away. So they set up a blockade, and another convoy of I don't know how many trucks just they just pushed through the RCMP blockade. They went around it, and they said, no, you're not arresting these guys at the border. So it's a huge problem here right now, and I guess the point is that people people are afraid of AI. They're afraid of losing their jobs. They're afraid of losing control and losing a say in society. Everybody wants their voice to be heard, and if there's computer, if there's there's a huge so this is no different though. I mean, any new technology that's come onto the planet, any disruptive technology has had problems, with people being in fear of it, right? Whether it be the printing press, whether it be cars, like any technology, that's disruptive, by definition, causes a bit of chaos, job loss, et cetera, and it takes people time to kind of accept it. So I think this is going to be one of the biggest challenges to overcome, to implement AI, in many different systems moving forward. It's not a technology issue at all. It's a human issue.
Thank you. Dr. Churchill, can you hear me? Dr. Churchill? I'm sorry, I think he has internet problem. Professor David Smith. Yes. There are many questions from audience, but I just want to know more about different types of artificial intelligence and some application.
All right, let me go ahead and answer a couple of those, and also I want to talk about a couple of the other places. How is machine learning related to artificial intelligence? Machine learning is part of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is a big bucket, and it has many different approaches and things in it. Machine learning is just one of the tools in the toolkit called artificial intelligence. And it goes with many others like natural language processing, deep learning, others like that, which makes up it. What is the role of AI in medical science in developing nations? Heavy role, particularly edge AI, because you're beginning to see them put into place. A standalone disconnected edge AI is, for example, the portable defibrillator that they would use for you, like in an office, a school, airplane, airport. It has AI in there that when they hook the sensors up to you, it begins to monitor you. It begins to make other things. It begins to make the decision on whether it's going to shock you, how much it's going to shock you, whether it was successful, and things like that too. So it's very big. You're seeing more and more of edge AI, particularly in mobile devices. Many of the watches, smart watches and things today have quite a bit of medical functionality in them. I like some of the new watches that, in addition to pulse, respiration, how many steps I take during the day, actually are telling people their O2 levels. And we know with COVID, O2 levels is one of the challenges which you face there. And I really think the edge AI will dramatically change healthcare. We've talked about some of the devices on humans, but we're seeing more and more surgery where we're using robotics in surgery. And just recently, the very first robotic surgery without a surgeon controlling the device was used. That 100% is necessary to have embedded AI at the edge to do that because of the precision, the reaction time you have. One of the big advantages, again, of AI at the edge is the reaction time. The latency you have is very, very low, and in many cases, almost none in there. The other place where we're seeing AI going to the edge is, well, Rob, I think it was yesterday, sent out a tweet with an analysis he wrote about Intel. Excellent, excellent tweet. But you're beginning to see companies like Intel and others begin to produce chipsets that are AI chipsets. So it is a way where they are taking the artificial intelligence and optimizing them, which will help them be used more at the edge, which will help them be used more in robotics, more in autonomous vehicle, more in healthcare devices, and other things like that. And Rob mentioned video earlier, and I can tell you that's one of the places that surprised me a lot recently. Is I know when I drive down the street now, you used to have sensors in the ground that measured how many cars were coming up to a light, and you would have other things like that. Almost everywhere now is using video cameras with image processing there at the edge to say, well, are there cars in the turn lane? Should I activate that? Are there no cars over on that side of it? So rather than go through a full cycle, let me use the image recognition using AI at the edge for that. And so it's there. And so that's some of the places where machine learning and image recognition and others are used very strongly. The one I really like on it is how to become an expert in AI at the edge. And the answer is so multifold. It depends what you want to do. Universities have a lot of research in this and pushing this one very strongly, particularly as AI at the edge is leading us to develop new types of AI algorithms that are more responsive to it. Many of the original AI algorithms were very processing dependent. It took large machines to process. Some of the early AI that I was exposed to right in the 90s were being run on supercomputers to be able to get the AI results out. The same type of algorithm, the same type of AI applications that we used back then that required a supercomputer, and this was in the Department of Defense, now can be done on portable devices, as we've seen. The power, Moore's law has been applied, and we see the power curves coming there and the communications car going there. You also begin to see Bob Metcalfe's law apply with AI at the edge. And as you begin to take the number of AI at the edge devices and they begin to network together, and sometimes when you do that AI at the edge, and that is called fog computing, and they begin to connect and you create this ring of it that each of them are interacting with others, each of their AIs are supporting each other, and the decisions you can make then and the actions you control are much greater as you begin to use that type of networking, beginning to, like I said, apply Metcalfe's law on top of Moore's law to get those enhancements there. So you can work at a university. There's a lot of industrial training programs. I saw a post this morning on my LinkedIn account where this person just graduated from a 6-month training program at Google to do AI at the edge technician work. So there's many, many options, but it's going to be very important in business executives, particularly where real time is important, where sensing is important, where automation is important, where you're controlling things. AI at the edge is something that should be on your radar scope, and you should begin training your people on how to use it because it is a different paradigm than we've had in the past, particularly back with some of the early numerical control devices. Marshall talked about how AI started really, I don't remember the year now, but I think it started back much further. Because if you go back and look at some of the things with numerical control, some of the mechanical control, which had different things in it where it did branching and trees. Branching and trees are some of the simplest forms of AI. So we've heard of things like if-then statements. If this, then go do that. That actually is a very simple form of AI. And you can take it and expand through it. But in the government realm, the utilization of AI, but the utilization of it for solving the everyday needs of the citizens is where they're going to get a lot of application at. In my example with using cameras to control street lights is a great example of using it to look at traffic patterns and adjust traffic patterns, of using it as you begin to do mass transit to help predict and model what you're doing, and using the outputs from it. Great example. But again, with AI at the edge, your processing's done at the edge, some of your storage is done at edge, your power consumption's lower, and your latency is very low or almost none in some instances.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. Dr. Churchill, can you hear me? Dr. Churchill?
And he's muted.
Hi, how are you, Sharif? Hello,
Yes,
gentlemen.
thank you.
Good to hear all of you. Thank you for the perspective, and perhaps my two bits on AI and perhaps the control and the control that we have. It might be profitable to define that we are not on the threshold of artificial intelligence, but rather we're in the midst of it. And I think this is what differentiates my point of view from everyone else, that I am absolutely certain that we are happening today, and whatever effect of AI you are experiencing, it will only be, slightly magnified. I do not foresee a tsunami of either good or bad, relevant to AI. The creeping intelligence, if you will continue to pervade our lives. However, it will not, by any means, necessitate us making any drastic changes, neither in our legislative functions, not in our politics, and certainly not in our business practices. So yes, like most other new technologies, a lot's being promised, and slightly less is being delivered. So yes, there is a lot of talk about it. There is tremendous amount of misinformation, as well as a lot of good relevant information. However, I'm here to tell you that it's pretty much a wet squib. Not much is going to happen that we will not be able to handle, and I don't expect that anything at all will happen that should require us to be afraid or scared. We leave that for the Hollywood types who are ready to make you freak out of your mind, especially in this COVID-induced, isolation that we all go through, and it causes people panic, anxiety, and mental disorders. So I tell my friends, and I consider you new friends, we all need to chill out, relax, and enjoy life, and forget about, the fear of robots coming and stomping us on our bed while we are asleep. It ain't gonna happen, not now, not ever. But should you be fearing about these things, I must tell you that it's most likely that you should be fearing the inundation of the climate change waters that they're gonna drown you in your sleep. Ha ha ha. So that's my two bits about AI. It's a friend. It's not a foe. It's a useful technology. We should engage with it, as best we can, but in a slow method that it is, getting to become part of our business lives. It would be a pleasurable experience for the future. I don't anticipate dystopia. I actually expect that the future will have better days ahead with some AI to behold. So thank you very much. I'm glad to be here as part of you, and I wish you all, since I speak to you for the first time in this new year, a very pleasant new year with some AI on the top and a little bit of cream fresh and maybe some cinnamon to go with your coffee, and everything's going to be just fine. So many blessings, and very pleased to see you. Thank you, Sharif, for inviting me. I'll be seeing you shortly. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you. Mr. Tom, there are some questions from audience. Onika, she wants to know about artificial intelligence. Okay, what is the role of AI in medical science in developing nations? Like now we have a lot of challenges for healthcare system. Yeah.
In developing nations, yeah, that's a very good question. I think it's obviously changing everything in medical science. It's allowing pathologists to determine diseases and maladies quicker with historical records and just even AI on the edge capability. So in developing countries, I think it has to be proliferated as soon as possible. Things are getting lighter; they're cloud based. So developing countries, as I've said before, are often poised in a better position than some of the developed countries who are ensconced in status quo and have institutions that want to stay institutions, and so there's a lobbying and there's a whole lot of tension on keeping things the way they are. But when a developing country with the have access to lighter and newer and better things. So I think it's important. Obviously, if there's any government or any agency that can invest in these things, it's a smart thing to do in a developed country, because you can become, because of these other developed countries who have status quo issues, you can become a leader, a global leader in a certain type of science, or if you invest in that right now, because you don't have these barricades. There might be cultural barricades and other things you need to overcome, but it's lighter, it's cheaper, it's becoming more and more proliferated, and a smart developing country will take advantage of that.
Thank you, Professor Rob. If you help our audience, uh, hello everyone. Specifically, do you think the museum misuse of modern technology like AI can ruin many things? I think Noor first read. This is
Oh,
a
absolutely.
question.
AI is not inherently good, nor is it inherently evil. Any technology that's deployed improperly can become a disaster. And of course, if it's deployed correctly, it can do great things. One of the advantages we have now with AI and its development is using heavy simulation. So if there's a problem, we can discover the problem in simulation and not in the real world. And that's really important when you're talking about putting robots and self-driving cars along with people and human-driven cars. And of course, the cars are carrying people as well. You wouldn't want a situation where those cars suddenly went rogue and decided to make right turns off a long bridge. Nor would you want them to like what happened with my first test of the Tesla Model X and their autonomous driving mode. You don't want an AI that puts you in the trunk of the car in front of you. And so it's important you test. The interesting thing about companies like Tesla and executives like Musk is they're willing to take massive risks for little reward. For instance, Musk's a presentation of his autonomous driving technology as autopilot long before it was capable of driving the car, and still isn't, driving the car unattended, resulted in a bunch of people getting killed. And because the technology just wasn't designed to do that yet. So done improperly, AI could be a huge risk. The implementation of AI allows the systems to make decisions at machine speeds. And if you think about it, if that means you can respond to things very quickly, but you could also do a lot of damage far more quickly than a human could step in and correct that damage. And recognize that AIs have a series of problems. One of them is improper, incomplete training. Another one is inherent or accidental bias, and a third, of course, is if they're hacked and compromised to do something in a hostile way. We had that water system in Florida that was hacked, and its automatic system, it wasn't an AI per se, but its automatic system was compromised, and it was about to dump lethal levels of chlorine into the water. It got caught by its human monitor, but the fact is that in a fully automated plant, say an automated nuclear plant, for instance, if someone were to go in and penetrate it and hack the plant and get the AI to act in a hostile fashion, you could you'd have a significant 5 Mile Island problem pretty quickly. So the AI is not inherently good. It's not inherently bad. The goal is to build AIs that do good things. But when you start implementing AI and defense systems and weapon systems, then clearly that those AIs are going to be killing people. That's their intent, and you have to be sure that that's not your people that they're killing. And there are significant efforts now in place. One of the bigger ones driven out of New Zealand to ban artificial intelligence in weapon systems. Personally, I think it's going to fail because you can't make it comprehensive, and that means the people that aren't part of the ban are going to develop them, and the people that are part of the ban are going to have to develop AI remedies or AI defenses at the very least to counter the AI weapon systems that are being created. So I don't think a ban's going to work predominantly because you can't enforce it globally. Much like trying to ban nuclear weapons doesn't work as long as somebody's still building them. So you do have to treat this technology as a potential danger, treat it with care, do a lot of testing and trials before you release it. Because if you don't, the outcomes could be dire, not only for the people using or around the technology, but for your own company, because of the liability would be extreme. One thing I want to bring up about autonomous driving trucks, which came up in terms of Canada, though I understand most of those presentations, or what's the word I'm looking for? The demonstrations are against mandates, but we have had, at least here in the U.S., the drivers union has come out against self-driving trucks, which has seemed kind of odd because the problem right now, particularly with long-haul truckers, is you can't get enough of them. Nobody wants to do the job. It's very boring, very dull, and it has long moments of boredom with a few moments of clear excitement if you fall asleep or the car in front of you decides to brake check you at an odd time. So it's not a very pleasant job. And the proposal for autonomous driving trucks is not to get rid of the drivers, because the testing has showcased that if you have an autonomous driven truck, there's a good chance that other cars will force it off the road, kind of bully the truck off the road, and then rob the truck. And so you have to have a human involved in the process, just as security, to make sure that the truck isn't robbed. And so you have some oversight. But that trucker stops being a driver and kind of becomes a purser instead. They can do accounting, they can track the load, they can do other jobs in the cab, they can watch movies. They don't have to actually drive the truck. They're just responsible for making sure the truck is secure and for handling the documentation of the load at the end. And so you might have one trucker for every 3, 4, 5, 7, 10 trucks in a convoy. And so that allows you, with existing pool of drivers, to cover the number of trucks that you need covered. I think it's forecast that we're going to be short in the United States about 350,000 drivers by 2025, which is going to do some pretty ugly things to logistics unless we can figure a way around that. And autonomous driven trucks can handle that. But part of that is you have to sell the drivers on this idea that the job's going to be a lot less intensive than it was, and probably a lot more fun than it is. But the problem is, if you turn them into pursers and accountants, you got to be sure that they like being pursers and accountants. I remember IBM tried something like that a few years back. They closed down their printing division, and they took the people that were in that division and they put them in finance and made them accountants. And those were the years that IBM's books went sideways, and that they had no integrity because those folks were not good at accounting. And so you do have to think through the underlying process. But the autonomous driving truck effort is really showcasing the need to both market, to retrain, and to do full simulation on the solution and convince people this is the way they want to go, as opposed to mandating it. Back to mandating anything, if the mask thing has shown us anything over the last couple of years, it's that mandates don't work if a large portion of the population is fighting the mandates. You actually have to convince people to do what you're mandating. You can't regulate it or force it, otherwise they'll rebel. Same thing will happen with the implementation of autonomous vehicles. If we don't convince people they want this stuff first, it won't be implemented, and we won't get the safety results that will otherwise happen. And we lose tens of thousands of people in the United States every year, and in the world, much larger numbers to accidents that autonomous driving would virtually eliminate. And yet we're presenting this like we're taking away people's privilege of driving, when instead we could be presenting this as a way that they could drive much more safely and still drive. There are two autonomous driving modes. There's chauffeur and there's guardian angel. Guardian angel is the one we should be selling. Chauffeur is the one we're presenting. And people don't like to have privileges taken away. They don't seem to have a problem with having their skills enhanced, which is what Guardian Angel does. They have a problem with not being able to drive anymore, which is what Chauffeur does. And we're presenting the wrong thing and building up a lot of friction in terms of getting this technology to market as a result. So part of the AI effort really has to be to sell people on the benefits of the AI, and then where you have job impact, have programs to retrain so that you don't end up with a lot of really pissed unemployed people, which isn't easily managed as Otto is apparently just partially discovering, and clearly we've had issues here in the States with a lot of resentment and pushback on technology that would actually help the situation as opposed to harm it. So it's important to recognize that AI isn't something that you build it and they will come. You actually have to market it, and you have to make sure that it is not doing harm and it is focused on doing good, because if you don't, it will do harm and you'll have serious problems.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. What do you want to add? Because Professor Rob actually covered many interesting points of autonomous vehicles and the supply chain. Yeah.
Well, first of all, I totally agree with Rob, what he talked about in terms of the adoption curve of AI. And going back to the historical point that David Smith brought up, and I do stand corrected, what I was trying to say then is it was AI was brought into the academic world in 1956. It wasn't invented in 1956. That was not my intention. In fact, I looked this up. Historically, AI has been around since ancient times. I found a depiction of a silver drachma from Crete depicting Talos, or Talos, I believe is the pronunciation, an ancient mythical automaton with artificial intelligence. And so even back in ancient Greece and Crete, they were thinking about these things. I think as long as human beings have been on the planet and have been thinking, we always have the imagination to talk about what is artificial intelligence. And to go back to Dr. Churchill's presentation of his thoughts, I kind of agree with what he was talking about, but I also disagree. I think he may have misunderstood what we're talking about. I think Rob and I and Tom and David and Paul have been talking about not our fears personally with this technology, but the fears in general of the population. I think Rob just articulated that it can be used like any technology for ill will or for ill-conceived projects. It can also be used to start wars. So it's like anything else. It has to do with human nature. And my background being clinical psychology, I think it's all about understanding human psychology. And what Rob brought up just now is, how do you create the adoption of this technology? And I think it's got to go through a series of iterations that other technologies may have not had to go through as much as this does. I think David brought up the issue that it's been around a long time. And I think because it's been in the consciousness of humankind for so long, it also creates kind of some ideas or thoughts of what is fear in people in general. And, there's a lot of fearful things going on right now. Right now, our travel to be able to get together is partially through science addressing the pandemic. But many people have fears about the pandemic. What's it going to mean to them, to their children, to their children's children? So I think AI is like any other technology in the sense that it creates an adoption curve. But unlike other technologies, because it impinges upon the human psyche about being replaced as a human being, I think that's something that has to be overcome. And I think Rob addressed that very well. And I agree with you that Rob addressed a lot of these things. I think so did Tom and David and Paul. And I can't really contribute anything to this other than to say that we are exploring AI in bringing it to use in sustainable development and addressing the climate crisis. And one thing that I think I forgot which presenter talked about is that the ability to create timely decisions at a rapid pace outpaces with AI, can outpace human thought. And I think that's scary on one hand, but on the other hand, as Rob pointed out, if it can prevent an accident, if it can prevent some damage to people, that is well worth its weight in gold. So I think we have an opportunity in front of us, but I think it's a challenging opportunity. And I think it has more to do with human psychology than it does with the technology itself. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Paul.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up, the points with Elon Musk taking the risk, and then people, in driverless cars, having accidents or having their fatalities in driverless cars from AI. For Musk's ideas to, in space exploration, AI could of course become a vital for, he wants to send people to Mars and set up colonies and so on. And if you have AI that you can send out there, it can actually make very rapid decisions and so on, because there's a huge latency, of course, in the signal being transmitted from, places like, Mars far away. If something goes wrong and you need some rapid decisions there, the AI becomes vital. And, it reminds me, there's this interesting joke, what's the best way to become a millionaire? And the answer is be a billionaire and buy and build a space company. So Musk is kind of he's building a space company and becoming even greatly increasing his wealth. Maybe he'll be a trillionaire soon. I don't know, but he actually showed support for the truckers in Ottawa, and that surprised a lot of people. But then people thought, well, in a few years when the Cybertruck is completed, he wants to be in favor with the truckers because he wants to sell them lots of Cybertrucks, and that's before they lose their jobs from the AI driving. But Rob's pointed out that yes, you would still need people, but their role would be different, if an AI was driving the truck. So there's a lot of like any technology, it's double-sided coin, if you like. It can be used for the good of humanity, and it can be used to the detriment of humanity. And the thing is to really think about the human aspects, when you're looking at any new technology. And the other point is we think, as humans, as we develop technology, that we're in control of the pathways to the future. But in actual fact, I love the philosopher Jacques Ellul, and French philosopher, and he wrote he thought deeply about technology and humanity, and he wrote a book that with technology in the title, back in the 50s or something, or 60s, the Technological Society or something. And he was arguing that that's not actually the case. We're not, what happens is, technologies come along and they change society and they change us completely. And we're kind of, we're not leading how we're not in charge as humans of how this technology is used and implemented. The technology comes along, lots of people start using it and like it, and then it's a matter of setting up regulations, trying to ensure that this technology isn't harmful versus helpful, etc. And there's a lot of unintended consequences of these new technologies. So it's not a simple thing that, we get a new technology and we as humans decide how we implement it and use it. Usually what happens is the technology comes along, there's many early adopters, there's many different people that start using it, and then we reach a situation where we find, oh, this is a bad thing. So now we have to try to catch up and regulate and have laws or whatever, and keep the technology sort of reined in or under control so that it's used in a positive fashion for humanity. Okay, but so that's more, there's a sort of iterative approach here between the technology advancing and us doing something relative to it, and then it advancing more. It's not that foresight from us humans can sort of set up a path and a plan for the technology. And that's because of the exponential growth of these, the exponential growth factor. Many of these technologies leap forward. It doesn't just creep up. I think, as Dr. Churchill was saying, I think it if it's exponentially increasing, then we're kind of behind and we're struggling to kind of figure out what's going on with it and rein it in. And before you know it, it's out there everywhere. It's ubiquitous, and our society has changed as a result of that technology. So we have a lot less agency as humans in this human technology advance forward. We have a lot less agency than we might think we have.
Thank you, Professor Paul. Thank you. This is excellent discussions, and I believe that our audience really like today's discussions. World Talent Economy Forum really focus on people, because all of the people around the world, they discuss about technology and investment. Many points they do not discuss about people. So talent economy, we strongly focus on talents. Even just 1 month before Harvard Business School, they communicate with us, and they said that what we are focusing, the talent economy, this is the futures, and we should more care about human resources, human resource development, how we can utilize human capacity. That is also important. I believe this month, Professor Clarin, Harvard Business School's graduate school's executive director, with her team, she going to join World Talent Economy Forum. We are collaborating together, and we are doing research on human resources. And that is our objective. We want to support more human resources. We want to bring more talented, and all of our speakers actually talented, like Professor David Smith, he is expert in public-private partnership. Tom Rose, he is expert in AI and creativity. Professor Rob, he is expert in business analysis. Mr. Marshall, with his company Solving Waste Management. Professor Paul, he is an expert in climate change. So all of the people are highly talented, and they are the talent, and they can solve many complex problems. That is our objective. And already different country, government, corporations, academy, everybody collaborating, communicating with World Talent Economy Forum. Already from Japan, with 600 researchers, B Lab, it's a part of University. They also collaborate with World Talent Economy Forum. I believe we have our honesty, we have our sincerity, as well as we are contributing for the people. Already we are supporting around 3,800 students, and we do not charge any single amount of money to the students. It's 100% free. Those who want to support World Talent Economy Forum, you want to change human lives, really you want to engage with the people, you can join our World Talent Economy Forum, as well as you can support our School of Talent Economy, our research initiative in our lab. Hopefully you can enhance human life, you can support human life, and you can change many human lives. We are very much action oriented. We need action. We need action, because next 2-3 years maybe will be very challenging, especially for economical aspects and other things, and we need to work together. The developing world, every people has to work together. We have to team up together. We are human, so we need to solve many human things. The world has many challenges. I don't know, even I saw many of the rich people in the COVID-19 situation, they died in the developing world. They have 11 banks. They are the owner of 11 banks. They never care about the healthcare system. And they lost their lives because of lack of oxygen. So I do not know, with so much of money and everything, what you do. First, develop your ecosystem, build hospital, build schools, solve your climate change related problems. So this is our request to all of the people around the world. Money is not everything. You have to care about the people. So World Talent Economy Forum, we extremely care about people. I know developing nations has many rich people. The even developed nations has many rich people. Who is a billionaire? Who is a trillionaire? It's not important. Important how you care about your people, how you contribute for your nations, how you contribute for your community. So World Talent Economy Forum extremely focus on contributions. We need contribution. We need support. If you are a hero, if you are a real talent, let's join our team and contribute for the people. It's not even for the developing nations. Even the developed world has many problems. We are happy to support any kind of problem. Like our Rwanda peoples that we finish our conference. Now they are trying to supporting the people in Europe with the healthcare worker. So we never know. We have to work together. We have to help each others. So that is our objective. Maybe there are many billionaires. Maybe there are many trillionaires. We don't care. We only care about people. So we need your support. I'm sure, I'm very much confident. If you support School of Talent Economy, World Talent Economy Forum in our lab, you can find many beautiful story and you can contribute more for the developing world. So let's work together. So thank you, everyone. I request all of our audience, please share our content with your government, with your corporations, with your academy. And I request for the concluding remarks for today, Professor David Smith.
Sharif, very important topic today because it represents where we're going with automation. It represents where we're going with taking AI to where it can run on smaller devices and react real time. My really concluding remark on this is something that people should be aware of, particularly in developing nations, because this is going to allow you to look at ways to more economically revolutionize some of the processes and things you have within your countries. For people in entrepreneurship, excellent opportunity to look at entrepreneurship activities. And when taken together with the academia and the companies and the government encouraging each other and supporting each other, particularly through education programs on this, not just research programs, but education for the existing workforce and others, it is an excellent opportunity to help create greater wealth within the nation. So Sharif, thank you.
Thank you, Professor David Smith, for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. Mr. Tom.
Yeah, great session today. I've learned so much, and I think it's Rob's right. It's about Marshall's right about it's about human behavior. It's about how we package this, and it's people shouldn't not only not be afraid of AI, they should be excited because done properly and presented properly, this last tool we'll ever need to build will take over all of the menial tasks and allow us, like the driver example of a guardian angel, somebody who is driving, all it is it's still a truck driver. He just doesn't have the concern of having to drive and take the rights and the turns, but they can still do so much more. And what they can do is determine where their passion is. With it's not just driving a truck, what their passion is, and during that time, while it's driving along with this automated truck, it can get on Etsy. It can do a vlog on YouTube. It can do whatever it wants to. This person can do whatever they want to do now that AI is taking over all the menial tasks that we need to be alert for. So anyway, there's a way to position this. There's a way to get excited about it, not just be afraid of it. But, we're afraid of it because of our genetic memory and our fear-based instincts that if we had super intelligence, this is what we would do. We would take over the world. But AI doesn't have any of that unless it's programmed to. Anyway, so I've learned a lot today. I'm really excited to be part of this panel, and I really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tom. Professor Rob.
Yeah, and I've got an 8:15 meeting I'm going to jump off to in just a second. So with AI, just again recognize that it is not inherently good or inherently evil. You need to be aware of the consequential damages of implementing any large complex system and mitigate those damages before implementation. One of those consequential damages is employment change. And you want to make sure that people that are being displaced are retrained and can do something that they also enjoy doing. Use that IBM example. You can't just take a bunch of people that are truck drivers and turn them into accountants and have them be happy. On the other hand, if you don't have enough truck drivers, then automation can be used to solve that particular problem. But you have to think through the human impact and mitigate it. If you're implementing an AI weapon system, you might also want to make sure you're implementing or creating an AI level defense. Weapons tend to be dual-edged, and just because you create it, as we discovered with the nuclear weapons, doesn't mean somebody else won't and create an even bigger problem. So thinking about how to mitigate a problem that you're intentionally creating with AI as you do with a weapon system, and then mitigating that with comparable technology is good. A couple things just to be aware of. Lifeboat Foundation has AI Shield. Google's also fueling an effort for an AI defense, which is designed to mitigate a Terminator moment. The idea that somebody on purpose or accidentally might create an artificial intelligence with enough power to do significant damage and put the race at risk. We should be putting as much effort as we can in creating an AI defense. So if something like that emerges, we have something that can act as quickly to mitigate it. So you're thinking about the opposing forces, much like you do if you develop a very high-powered car. You also have to develop very high-powered brakes. Now, otherwise, you're going to end up on a wall at high speed. So the same thing with AI. As we're developing these technologies, we need to make sure that they are robust, they're solid, that they do what we intend them to do, and that the collateral damage that they create through change is mitigated at the start. And that way, it's much more easily implemented, much less chance you're going to do that harm, and you can assure the positive outcome of the technology, which is not inherently embedded in it. So in the end, AI is a force for good. It could also be a force for bad. Our efforts need to be focused on making sure that the latter outcome isn't the one that predominates.
Thank you, Professor. Mr. Marshall.
Yeah, I think the concept that Rob just brought up is important. And the two attributes that were mentioned, Paul mentioned latency as an attribute that AI can overcome. And Tom mentioned several attributes that AI can overcome in terms of as a technology. And I think what Rob is addressing and Tom and David are addressing is that there's obviously the psychological barriers have to be overcome. I think based on these this human interaction that goes all the way back to Crete even. I think psychologically we have a greater barrier to adoption of this innovation than other technologies. But it's not impossible to overcome. I think Tom pointed that out. I agree with him. I also agree with David in the sense that all the benefits that it creates, and that and I think that attribute that David mentioned, which is latency, is a critical element that will allow adoption to occur faster than one might think otherwise, because latency in the human mind can cause damage, and in terms of decision making, even artificial intelligence here on Earth can move at light speed, as they say, greater than the human mind can. The human mind is very powerful. But I think the ability for human beings to keep up to speed with these tasks that Tom talked about, automating certain tasks and eliminating the latency that Paul's talking about, and we can get to the results that David has been mentioning, and that is that we can generate artificial intelligence as a boon to humankind and not as a threat. But again, it's like anything else. it's up to us people to adopt it in a way that fits our society and our cultures. I know, Sharif, you always talk about that in the developing world, there is a difference between cultures, and that is so true. So I think that's another issue in the adoption of this technology is cultural adoption. I think it's interesting that somebody mentioned that what happened in Canada with the drivers taking it one way and Elon Musk coming to their side of the equation, whereas in India it might be seen in another way, or in Bangladesh or in Malaysia. It might be each country has its own issues, and I think we need to understand that it's not like adopting a surgical technique. Okay, if a surgeon is being trained in surgery, let's say heart surgery or brain surgery, and they're going to use a scope in a certain method, and the adoption of that technology for robotic surgery, which is part of AI, could occur. Somebody asked about medical. That's occurring already, but that's in a discipline that's specific. Whereas if you're going to use AI in a broad spectrum for all sorts of things, everything from transportation, supply chain management, addressing the climate crisis, all that is going to be seen at the cultural level, I think, first, before it gets adopted in each country. And you'll see adoption occurring in certain societies more rapidly than others. That's my take. And that's based on my experience of adoption of innovation of other technologies. So thank you again, Sharif, for hosting this. And thank you for having me on this panel.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor Paul, what's your
Yes,
conclusion?
I think one of the things where AI can make a huge difference, of course, it's in, if you've got reams of data on a particular thing, it's very good at, it can become, the human brain excels at pattern recognition. Often we just seem to have this gut feeling, or we know things. If we're playing chess, for example, we know what the best move is just because we've got this pattern recognition and we've played numerous of other games. And when you get AI involved in in playing chess, for example, it comes up with moves that look like they're alien moves. No chess player would ever make them, but deep analysis shows that it's the correct idea. But so I think, AI being used to assess the risks of a meteor or comet strike on the Earth, for example, looking at the orbits of all of the planets and all of the known objects out there, and maybe going through the raw data from like the Hubble telescope or the new telescope, right? The Webb telescope, James, that one that's just, if it looks at the data and it can it can be used to assess threats of from meteor impacts. Imagine AI being used in the development of the new vaccines. So a new virus comes along and you want very, very rapid response. And, the period to develop the vaccines that we did for the coronavirus basically set all records in terms of speeds, et cetera. But I know that the U.S. Army is working on a vaccine which will supposedly work against every type of coronavirus variant, and including any future ones. That's what their claim is. I don't know if they're using AI assistance in that at all, if it's advanced enough. AI in terms of for example, looking at the large threats to humanity, like a super volcano, analyzing all of the data on volcanoes that have gone off in the past, on the conditions and the data. We have sensors up on the volcanoes to analyze that data. Really good volcanologists will, they can kind of know if something is changing, whether it's can be a very bad thing, signaling an imminent eruption, etc. And of course, with climate change, the joke is that, ask AI to what's the solution to climate change, and getting rid of the humans is not an acceptable response, right? It's not a desirable response. So, looking at, there's lots of different aspects of climate change that could be studied. Again, it's reams and reams of data, looking for patterns in the data. One of the big things in climate change is that because of the heat distribution changing on the planet, the poles are warming much faster, and that's disrupting the jet streams, which then leads to the extreme weather events, etc., which likely will lead to threats to our global food supply. In a few within the decade, if we lose the Arctic sea ice, etc. So these sort of things require a systems type of thinking. A climatologist who spends all his time on one glacier studying that glacier, knows everything about it, but can't tell you much about the overall climate system. So AI utilization to basically, the goal, I think, with AI is to, once it has all of the data, all of the information, then it determines, what needs to be done, as opposed to us saying, well, let's stick an AI in looking at a particular aspect and get it to find a solution, right? So things will emerge once the huge data is there and the intelligence is there with the machine. Then then the solutions and things will start to emerge from it. So this emergent property is very important, I think, with AI.
Thank you, Professor Paul, Professor David Smith, Mr. Tom Rose, and Mr. Marshall for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forums. And I request all of our speakers, please share our content with your people. Thank you, bye bye, and take care.